Hello everyone. My name is Kesh. If you and I haven't met before, welcome to another episode of Friday Night Live. I teach people how to invest in real estate. Now, this is a part two of the previous recording we did for last week, where we really broke down the world of real estate investing. In fact, for those of you who missed it out, I'm going to get producer Ryan to put that into the description. Again, we're trying out a new format. I don't have Mark and Sean with me for this video. They're going to be back very soon. Promise you, they haven't disappeared. We're in fact changing where we record our Friday Night Live, like I said, to give you guys more content, more interaction, and take the production level to the next stage. Now, last week, we talked a little bit about the basics, about breaking down and actually how much real estate one needs, and what is a formula to really figure out what that is, and what are the sort of challenges people go through. And a part two version of that today was for me to give you some insights around being an investor and actually understanding the whole game of investment, not only from a cash flow perspective, not only from a property selection perspective, but a holistic approach to investing. And we're going to talk about that. Before I jump into that, in fact, I was speaking to someone this morning, and this is something I used to do almost every single year since I can remember. And this is very important. And I thought I'll share this with you guys today before we carry on and get into the larger episode of Friday Night Live today. So this concept of burn rate, you can see it here. I've just highlighted that. Burn rate is a very interesting concept. So it's often used by startups where they get funded an X amount of money, or a business gets funded an X amount of money, and they have a runway, if you will, before they, run out of money and they got to turn profitable to be able to keep the business growing. Very similar to in our own lives, we often have a burn rate, whether we realize it or not. And it's something that I really want to touch on in today's episode. So when you think about the burn rate can be easily worked out by looking at your total assets minus liabilities, right? So if you looked at it that way, saying that, okay, if I have, I don't know, say 4 properties, all of these properties are worth, say, $1 million each, for example, and this does not include your own home, and I'll explain why. These are investment properties, say overall, say $4 million. And let's say on each property you owe, I don't know, say $500,000 into four, that is about $2 million. So that if you were to sell these properties, your gross would be about $2 million. And of course, then there's going to be some selling costs, agents' fees, capital gains tax, so on and so forth. So you might get a, maybe not $2 million, maybe 1.4-ish million, or so on and so forth, depending on your tax rate in your hand, right? Now, what the burn rate basically is, and we should do this, right? And in my last episode, we did talk about this, and I'll just do a little refresher here, if you will. What do people do? People go to work, and at work, they exchange their time plus skills, if you will, to make money, right? And then this money goes everywhere. We talked about this. So we know 30 to 47% of this will go into tax. And then we have super, so 10% will go into super. About 30 to 40% goes into mortgage or rent. And maybe another 10 to 15% goes into bills and repayments and so on and so forth, right? So if we go 30, 10, 30, 60, 70, 80, 80% to 90% of your income is already pre-committed, right? And this is for basic living. Now, God forbid, your skill becomes irrelevant, or you can't exchange time, or you lose your job. What will happen? This money will disappear. If this money disappears, you don't have to pay any more tax, which is a good thing in a way, if you will. No more super, right? You also won't be able to pay your mortgage, right? You won't be able to afford bills, repayments, and your basic expenses, your fixed costs, your cost of money you require to live will disappear. So it's a very dangerous way to live this way. So the burn rate is to understand if I lost the ability to work, or if I wanted to stop working tomorrow morning, how many years would this amount last me? So say, for example, after your burn rate, if you come up with $1.4 million in this example, and you need $100,000 per annum to survive, so you'd take 1.4 million and you would divide that essentially by $100,000, saying that, okay, say 14 years or so, I would be able to live the way I'm living right now without having to sell my house, so on and so forth. It won't be 14 years because what I've not done in this example is adjusted for inflation, cost of living, change in interest rates, so on and so forth. It'll be less than this, but that gives you an idea. And I do this every year to see if my burn rate has changed, right? Because if your only source of income is going to work and making money, which funds, your home, your bills, your children, your family, it's a pretty dangerous way to live, if you will. People talk about investing being risky, but not investing, I think, is much more riskier. And the goal is, of course, creating that passive income and doing all of those things, and getting your tax back and bringing those financial efficiencies in. But the greater goal for people should be, how do I widen out my burn rate by making the right financial decisions, by buying the right assets, so that, God forbid, if the scenario ever does arise, or you decide to stop working, go on a holiday, maybe take 3 years off, do you have sufficient amount of funds there where your lifestyle doesn't change, or if you've got family, your family still gets access to all the things that they do right now. You don't have to change location, suburbs, schools, so on and so forth. So that's the idea of burn rate. I just thought I'll share that with you before I get into today's episode. I thought it was very, very interesting. Let me know what you think of this. Work out your own burn rates, if you will. I think moneysmart.com.au, let me just see if I can find it, if you don't know what your burn rate is, let me just see here. Tools and resources, budget planner. Let me have a quick look here, see if I can give you guys an example of what this looks like. From my desktop view, if you guys can see that. So that is a budget planner, so moneysmart.com.au. It's a free resource. You can go there, put in your take-home income, what you do, your home utilities, mortgage, essential stuff, insurance, financial commitments, so on and so forth. It'll give you a summary. It'll give you the amount of money you actually really, really need, and just put in the essential stuff, so then you know what your burn rate really is, your fixed cost and your lifestyle cost, essentially. And if you don't know what that means, watch my previous video, and that will give you a little bit of insights into what we are talking about today. But jumping back into today's episode, what I wanted to touch on today was understanding the power of leverage and understanding the power of compounding things. And then maybe potentially, if we've got time today, to do a live cash flow analysis, if you will, where we can go through things together and look at, what sort of cash flow do you really get out of a property, and what are your commitments towards building a property. Or might do a separate video for that. We'll see how we go with today. So as an investor, understanding the concept of leverage is very, very important, right? Investors want to park money. So you're putting your own money in here. So this money is usually the money you require, say, from a deposit perspective, and say potentially, and other buying costs, right? Other buying costs. And I talked about a little bit of this in our previous episode of what actually goes into buying a property, how much you need for a deposit, lender's mortgage, insurance, step by step. So if you haven't watched that, go back and watch that. That'll give you a little bit of understanding, right? You need a little bit of money to get into a property deal, and then we borrow money from the bank, and there is a X. And we borrow money from a bank at some X cost. And that X cost is essentially the interest, right? The interest. So what we are trying to do is we're going, right, this is a asset, right? This is an asset, and this asset has a red line, and red line represents the X cost, right? Actually, the X cost, which is essentially the interest from the bank. It also is any other costs associated, so property management fees, maintenance, repairs, so on and so forth. There's a fixed line of cost to every asset that we produce. Now, the green line here represents the cash flow. So this is a combination of rent, tax benefits. Let's put them together. So what is your after-tax cash flow? Is it above the red line, or is it below the red line? Right. So the after-tax cash flow from a particular property. Do you still need to put in money from your back pocket to hold this asset, or does it look after itself, and so on and so forth? Right. Now, often people get confused with principal and interest-only repayments. Again, paying down principal of a loan is essentially forced savings. So if you're paying a mortgage and you're paying $4,000 per month, and just for argument's sake, so you understand the concept, let's say $1,500 per month off that $4,000 goes into the principal amount. So $4,000 minus 1,500, let's say, and $2,500 goes into, say, interest, right? Or whatever it might be. Now, this interest is the cost. This $1,500 that you're putting into the property is you're paying down the principal. So that's just forced saving. It's like almost putting away $1,500 a month towards saving. It's going into this asset. Make sense? And this is the actual cost of borrowing the money. This is where the bank is making money. And the idea of leverage is, can we make more money than what we're actually paying the bank? And then let me put in a blue line. A blue line is future value. Future value of this asset. That is essentially, say, capital growth. Say what this property for X dollars, in 10 years, it'll be worth X, Y, Z. So this borrowing money is called leverage. It's being able to use other people's money, the bank's money, plus our money, and really make our property grow, right? So when you look at a typical property, we did an example, say for a $650,000 property. Above, we would have needed circa $110,000 in that example to go towards the deposit plus, say, other costs, right? Deposit plus other costs is what we would have needed. Now, if we look at this money in the bank, for example, so if I went into here and I said, right, let me put $110,000 into a bank account, $110,000 into a bank account, and I don't make any more deposits and I leave it for 10 years, and let's say you get 1% interest on your money from a savings account, right? Let's say that's what you're getting, and I'm just doing a rough example here. I know that in 10 years' time, that my initial deposit, $110,000, total interest earned would be about $11,000. So the total amount of money I can walk away after 10 years would be my principal, the 110, plus the interest I've earned on it. Now, again, on interest earned from a bank, you end up paying tax, so it'll be lesser than this. On equity, you don't end up paying tax unless you liquidate your position, right? So again, we can see here that $110,000 at this time will do this for us. So let's write that down. So we have something to compare it with by leaving properties in the bank. So $110,000, instead of putting it into a property, if I just leave it in the bank and do nothing else, in the bank, And if I do nothing else, $110,000. After 10 years of just leaving it there, say we average about 1% interest, or whatever it might be, 0.35, 0.45, whatever they're paying now. Savings accounts are usually losing accounts, and that's why people's savings don't keep up with inflation, and that's why people feel the cost of living expenses going up, right? It's not the first time it's happened. This is consistent if you really understand how inflation really works. So 10 years, 1% return on your savings, leaving it in the bank, you're going to have about earned interest would be about $11,000, 564, and your total amount would be your principal amount that you put in plus the interest you've earned. So you'll walk away with $121,000, 564. So that is what you're doing with $110,000 if you left it in the bank. But with real estate, with property, for example, it works a little bit differently. We're putting in $110,000 plus we are borrowing some sort of money. So say on a $650,000 property, if we borrowed at 90%, we would have borrowed another $585,000. And out of this, say 65 has actually gone into the property, right? So all up together, it works out to be about $650,000. So this plus this, let me double check that math. Yep, that works out to be about $650,000. The $65,000 minus the 110 are buying costs. So the extra $45,000 in there are buying costs. So stamp duty, legal fees, you know, solicitors, whatever it might be, some miscellaneous costs, inspection reports, whatever it might be, right? Other expenses that are attached to buying real estate. So now what's happened is my total exposure in the market, instead of 110, I've taken that 110K and borrowed 585, and my total exposure in the market is about $650,000. Now, if we go back and look at the median performance of real estate over the last 25 years, we can see that the national average for houses has been about 6.8%, and for apartments has been about 5.9%, right? So we can see at a 5% plus growth, some cities more than others, so on and so forth, right? And again, in the future, we're going to be looking at some ridiculous numbers when it comes to the value of real estate. And there's a whole different conversation around why real estate does this and why real estate is one of those very rare asset classes that actually keeps up or often even outperforms inflation, right? And we'll talk about that in another episode if you guys are interested. So let's go back to the same example that we were thinking about from a return perspective. So we can see here that the average return has been between about 6.8% for houses over the last 25 years. And for apartments, it's been about 5.8%. And often houses and properties have been, they beat inflation, especially in capital cities. And right now the inflation rate sits at, say, circa 5.1% at the moment, right? But I don't even want to take that. Let's just say very, very conservatively, this grows only at 3% per annum, right? Grows at 3% per annum, and that's what it can do for us, right? So let's go back into our calculator that we were using before, and let's plug in the same number. So let's take the property that we have bought for $650,000, and say we make no other regular deposits over 10 years, and let's say it grows at 3% per annum, right? Only 3%. So when people say, oh, the market's going to come down or do this or do that, even just based on inflation, the replacement cost of real estate causes real estate markets to grow, right? So if we look at our initial deposit of $650,000, and even at a maximum annual growth rate of only 3%, okay, which is extremely, extremely conservative, right? You can see here that your deposit, your $650,000 is worth $877,000. So again, let's go back to our drawing board, if you will. So what does this look like now? So I'm just going to erase this bit here so I can put this next to each other. So we took our original 110 plus we borrowed a little bit of money. We borrowed a little bit of money, so $650,000 multiplied by 90%. I think it was 585. We borrowed about $585,000 from the bank, and we had total exposure of about $650,000 over 10 years. We didn't do anything. Just imagine we never did anything. We didn't even pay down the interest, the principal, the loan is as it is over 10 years, right? And we looked at evidence. There's evidence there. Again, interest rates calculated on savings is evidence-based, 0.35%, and thereabouts is what you're getting today on savings accounts. We saw evidence of performance, but yet we have gone with a growth of only 3%, right? 3% is extremely, extremely conservative for capital growth. Even the worst quality properties in capital cities in Australia have performed at over 5%. Apartments, houses, doesn't really matter over a span of 10 years' time when you look at those properties. So now, in 10 years' time, what is our situation? In 10 years' time, the total interest accumulated or the total growth accumulated is 227,080, right? Because what we are compounding is $650,000 and not 110. We have supercharged the 110 by adding leverage. So we have now expanded that to a different level, and our total amount value of our 110 now is basically $877,000, which is basically 650 plus this. Now, if I subtract the original loan amount, and let's say this was your principal place of residence, so there's no capital gains tax, right? Just for the explanation today, to keep it super simple so you understand the concept. So what we will do is we'll take the 877,080, subtract that by what we owe, $585,000. That works out to be 292,080. That is in 10 years, right? So you can see the $110,000 in the bank will accumulate $11,000 for you. $600,000 will be worth 227. But yes, we did borrow money, and even at a less than 3%, your end result is almost. So let's look at it. 292 minus 121,564. Dollar for dollar, you're $170,516 ahead. So imagine if you did this 5 times across 5 properties over 10 years, you're looking at about $852,580 in there, right? Again, what I've not factored in is the tax you get back. I've not factored in the rental income, because what assumptions we have made is when we buy a property today, the fixed costs and the costs of holding these assets are managed by the after-tax cash flow. That means we don't need to chip in that extra money, right? And this is the power of leverage. This is the power of compounding when you look at buying real estate. So the idea of buying real estate is very simple. It is control. And the longer and the more real estate you can control, the more money you end up making at the back of it. The next part of control where people really make big mistakes is cash flow. And the biggest mistake they make in that cash flow is not understanding that my costs, while I control this real estate, right? I put in money, bought real estate, but the costs associated to it. So interest, property management, right? Property management, insurances, vacancies, repairs, whatever it might be, whatever it might be. These costs have to have to be managed by the cash flow plus tax back from your portfolio. This will minimize heartache, will allow you to hold real estate longer, and the longer you hold real estate, the more compounding effect you essentially have. So if I go back to the same example we were looking at, instead of 10 years, if I leave it in there for say 20 years, you can look at the compounding effect of what it is. So when you, as an investor, when you buy the right quality of assets, and you buy proper properties that fit within this fundamental, that you know these rules have been set, these processes have been set, and you understand how to minimize vacancies, you understand how to minimize having to reinvest into the same property for maintenance and other expenses and so on and so forth, and you're able to control these deals long term, you could eventually just liquidate these assets and put yourself in a position. Like, before I wrap up, I'll give you a small example, that we a very interesting example of something that we did with a client. So essentially, this person wanted to have their home debt free. That was very, very important to them, right? It was a psychological thing that was very important to them. They wanted their home to be debt free. And essentially, they lived in a property that was pretty old, but it was very big. And they wanted to downsize and they wanted to be debt free, but they didn't want to compromise on location, amenities, and they wanted something in Sydney. So essentially, on this home, there was still from memory, I think there was about $800,000 mortgage. It's about a $3 million sort of house. Um, and essentially, what they wanted to do was they wanted to downsize. So they wanted say, circa 300-meter square-ish block, and they wanted a nice 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-car, but with multiple living spaces. So they still wanted a bigger home. They wanted multiple living spaces, and they wanted it to be really, really nice. Extra high ceilings, custom cabinetry. They wanted something really, really nice that they could move into. Now, for those of you who really understand how the world of depreciation and taxes work, essentially, and I'll do a whole different series on that, we can see here that a high spec home today, 180-meter square home today, constructed in Sydney, can give you as much as about $13,800 back in tax as non-cash deductions from their property, right? So you're looking at over 10 years, you're looking at a substantial amount of money coming back. In fact, in the first 5 years, you're looking at least a minimum of $55,000 to $60,000 in deductions that you could expect from your portfolio, if you will, right? So anyway, long story short, we were talking about these things, and they also wanted to minimize their tax and do various things. So what we decided to do was we went out and purchased a block of land in a pocket they really liked. And we got really lucky with that. We didn't have to do a knockdown, which was good. So no cost of clearing up sites and knocking down. We found a really nice location that they really, really liked. It ticked all the boxes, and by chance, we were able to secure a empty block of land. And then, of course, we went out there and did a build. Now, we did a pretty good high spec build on this property. We did a pretty good high spec build on this property, and now from memory, I can't remember. I think it all added up being about $1.3 million, and I think we had done an 80% LVR or something like that on this property. Now again, these are just rough numbers, guys. I can't remember the exact scenario, and I think the loan amount was circa $1.04 million on this particular property. So we built it out. It took us almost 8 months to get the build done. COVID delays, so on and so forth. Built it out, rented it out. They're getting depreciation on this property, so on and so forth. And what they've decided to do, and they've got a few more investment properties, what they've decided to do is sell the principal place of residence, right? sell the principal place of residence now. It's gotten too big for them. They want to downsize. They're in that phase of their life. So they are selling it now for $3.3 million. They're going to pay back the agent, say another 25K, say $800,000 loan back plus another $25,000 minus 3.3 million. So they're going to be walking away with roughly about 2.475 million after the sale. This money is going to go straight into this property, and the remaining money is going to go into the other investment properties, so on and so forth, and they're going to keep a little bit of a cash. So again, from their strategy perspective, what we did was we got them a property that they rented out for a couple of years. They built it out the way they wanted to do. They maximized the depreciation on this property over the last 2 years. They wanted to do it a little bit longer, but they decided to close the race. The idea was to do this for 5 years at least before they move in. We're doing this a little bit prematurely, but this was a great way for these guys to be able to get their downsizer property, get a couple of years of tax benefits from it, and not end up paying capital gains tax in this scenario because they ended up selling their principal place of residence. Again, they're only able to do this because they owned real estate, right? So if you don't own anything at all and you leave money in the bank, forget the passive income and forget all of that those bits are very important, but you will never have any resource to be able to move forward. By leaving money in the bank, we're literally wasting our time. The quicker you're able to accumulate real estate, the quicker you can accumulate real estate, you can accumulate real estate. So if I can make 4 purchases, say in a span of 3 years, and hold this real estate for say 20 years time, your situation will be far different from making the same property purchases over a span of say 15 years time. The compound effect would be very, very different. So again, leverage is your best friend. And whether interest rates are 3%, 4%, 5%, as long as your green line is above the red line, you're fine. It really doesn't matter. And that does come down into breaking down the cash flow and then having a strong deal selection framework attached to it. Guys, hopefully you got some value out of today. This was part 2 of our first video. I'm hoping you're enjoying this new format. We want to keep them short, sharp, give you all the insights, and hopefully in the next week's episode, I'm going to have Sean and Mark back with me. We're going to be trialing out new things, but let me know if you've got any questions. Let me know if you've got any doubts. Again, I'm keeping these very, very concept-based so you understand things. I'm purposely not adjusting for tax and inflation and complicating the calculations, because once you understand the concepts, you understand the ABCs, moving forward and building out a portfolio becomes much, much, much more easier. Now, unfortunately, given the time we have today, I couldn't do the cash flow analysis, but if you do want to see a detailed cash flow analysis on properties, what it really looks like, principal and interest, various so on and so forth, let me know in the comments and I can do a dedicated video for that. It has been an absolute pleasure, guys. This is very, very interesting doing it in this format. It is fun. And we didn't have any sound effects, I just realized, on this one, and no rapid robins. But until next time, thank you all. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys next week. My name is Kesh, and this has been Friday Night Live. Bye for now.